Welcome to Messy Minded, a podcast for curious weirdos who like true stories with the odd side quest. I'm Jess, and today we're talking about a salamander named after a god who tried to dodge sacrifice, an animal that can regrow limbs without scarring, and a creature that exists in a permanent state of unfinished. Along the way, we'll visit an Aztec creation myth, muddy canals outside Mexico City, and the very thin line between healing and sealing something shut. Please enjoy. This is the Axolotl episode. Okay, picture this. You're a cartoonish creature with permanent baby cheeks, feathery external gills that look like anime hair accessories, and a tiny smile that suggests you know something we don't, and find it at least mildly amusing. You can regrow your limbs, and you never fully grow up. And scientists are starting to stare at you like you might be holding the cheat codes to mortality. This is the axolotl, and yes, it's a real animal. Not a Pokemon, but it does remind me a bit of one. Except in this case, its adult form is not its most powerful version. More on that later. The axolotl is a relative of the tiger salamander that basically said no thanks to puberty and evolution and then just didn't do it. Most salamanders start life as aquatic larvae, then go through metamorphosis. Lungs develop, gills appear, they move on to land. The whole amphibian coming-of-age story. His hormones are kicking in, he's starting to notice girls, or at least becoming aware that girls exist, and this is suddenly very distracting. His parents are like, hey buddy, it's time. You're gonna grow lungs, leave the water, get a nice damp log of your own, and start your life on land. And he's like, have you seen land? It's dry. There are birds. Everything is loud, things smell weird, and I like my room. I just got my posters up. He runs off in a huff and slams the door to said room. He wants to be his own salamander, but also maybe still come home and have his mom do his laundry. Maybe retreat back to the pond when things get to be a lot. His parents tell him through the closed door that this is just how it goes. Everyone does this, they say. It's just part of growing up. And eventually, he opens the door, leaves the water, and makes his parents proud by becoming the land-dwelling adult salamander he was meant to be. The axolotl never does that. It stays aquatic, keeps its gills and its baby face, keeps living in water, refusing to give up its comfy bath. Ooh. This condition is called neoteny, which is a sciencey way of saying permanent youth. And yes, if you've seen The Substance, this is where your brain might start whispering, youth forever. Surely this ends well. But unlike the movie, which is essentially a 2-hour warning label, the axolotl version actually works. No side effects, just a salamander who said, I'll keep the gills, thanks. And the universe shrugged and let it happen. This is a strategy that has worked for them for thousands of years, but not without a little delightful mythological drama. The axolotl's name comes from Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and it roughly translates to water monster, which is kinda rude given how cute they are. They're named after Xolotl, the Aztec god of fire, lightning, death, and sometimes unfortunate transformations. According to the legend, when the gods decided the universe needed to be sacrificed to keep the sun moving, as one does, Xolotl did not want to volunteer. Nope. So he shape-shifted to escape. So let's rewind, way back, to a time when the universe ran on a very aggressive subscription model. By the time the Aztecs arrived, Teotihuacan was already a ruin. Massive pyramids, a long ceremonial road, apartment compounds, murals, an entire city that felt too big and too intentional to have been built by ordinary humans. So the Aztecs did what humans have always done when confronted with something ancient and incomprehensible. They said the gods must have done this. And in their mythology, Teotihuacan became the place where the universe sort of rebooted. In Aztec cosmology, the world had already been created and destroyed multiple times. Suns rose, suns fell. Entire versions of reality got wiped out, and by the time humans showed up, the gods had figured some things out. The sun and moon weren't moving on their own, and they decided it would be heckin' sweet if the sun and moon rotated around the earth and were separated by 12 hours. They figured to achieve this, the sun had to be fed, specifically
with the blood of the gods.
So the gods gathered at Teotihuacan to create a new sun and to keep it moving. One god sacrificed himself in fire and became the sun, but the sun didn't move, which is when the gods realized something completely inconvenient. For the universe to function, they all had to die. Imagine thinking you're that important. Anyway, let's meet our guy, Xolotl. Xolotl is a complicated god. He's associated with fire and lightning, but also death, the underworld, twins, deformity, and things that don't quite fit right. He escorted souls to the underworld, he guided the sun through the night, so he understood endings. Which is why, when the gods lined up for voluntary cosmic immolation, Xolotl said, no. Instead of jumping into the fire, Xolotl ran. And because he's a shapeshifter, he didn't just run, he transformed. First, he turned himself into a maize plant hiding among the crops. The idea is clever. Hide in plain sight. Maize was the foundation of Mesoamerican life. Humans were believed to be created from it even, so turning into corn was almost like Xolotl trying to dissolve into humanity itself and become something so ordinary and essential that no one would think twice. Not a bad plan, but the gods know him. They walk among the fields and identify the plant that is off. In some tellings, it's because maize is sacred and it's watched closely. In others, it's because of Xolotl's essence, his wrongness. His liminality can't fully disappear. He's a god of things that don't fit neatly, and even as a plant, he still doesn't quite blend in. There's no punishment yet, just the realization that transformation alone isn't enough. Hiding as something rooted, literally unable to flee, is a bad long-term plan. So Xolotl escapes again. This time, he turned into maguey, probably best known as the agave plant. Sharp, spiky, unpleasant to grab. Kinda like, fine, touch me now, punks. Same outcome. The gods find him again. So finally, in desperation, Xolotl transformed himself into something that could disappear completely. He became an axolotl. The word comes from Xolotl, meaning God. If you're like me and you like to axolotl questions, all right, get it. No. So dumb. You may have noticed that a lot of these words ended in otl. I looked it up, and otl's often found at the end of a noun to tie it to something embodied or living. And axolotl, often pronounced these days as axolotl, meaning animal or Xolotl's thing or animal form. Anywho, back to the mythos. This is a water creature. Of canals and mud and reeds, something soft and overlooked. Something that could sink, hide, and wait. He slipped beneath the surface, hoping the gods would lose interest. They didn't. I saw some versions of the story where his brother spares him, at least for a time. But in most versions of the myth, Xolotl as the axolotl was so majestic, he was adored by all the fish that saw him, and was easily found amid the adoration, and eventually the other gods sacrificed him anyway. With the blood of Xolotl, the sun and moon began to rotate and gave new life to the earth. Today, the sun has enough time to give energy to the world, while the moon can give the world a rest after a long workday. When I think about that first god leaping into the fire to become the sun, the other gods following, sacrificing themselves one by one, Xolotl refuses, runs, transforms a bunch of times. He resists longer than anyone else, so he's the final god remaining. The people must have been thrilled. We've only got one god left and he's this weird fish thingy. Like I said, in most versions, he's still found and sacrificed. Only after this last god dies does the new sun begin to move across the sky. So cosmically speaking, Xolotl doesn't just die, he closes the system. But the animal, the axolotl, the form he took in that moment of refusal, remained. Thousands of years later, here we are, still staring at this animal that represents refusal, transformation, hiding instead of conquering, and also staying in between states. This little creature is literally named after a god who tried to dodge between destiny by becoming something small and strange. #relatable. Which I think reframes biology in a really interesting way. Because remember, axolotls don't fully metamorphose. They stay larval and aquatic. They remain in a liminal state between being and becoming. This creature's superpower isn't aggression or dominance or growth at all costs. It's endurance through refusal. The axolotl survived in story, in culture, and in the waterways around what is now Mexico City. Specifically, Lake Xochimilco, the only place in the world they naturally exist. Which brings us to an uncomfortable modern truth. Sorry to be a bummer, guys. It's okay. While axolotls are everywhere in labs, aquarium, and Minecraft, they are critically endangered in the wild. Just let that sink in for a sec, because in 1998, there were more than 6,000 per kilometer in Xochimilco. That's a dense, healthy wild population. In 2014, there were less than 36 per square kilometer. That's a 99% decline. A huge drop, and a stark way to show habitat collapse. And current estimates suggest that maybe only 50 to 1,000 adult axolotls are still kicking it in the wild today. One of the most studied animals on Earth, possibly even holding answers for us in regard to spinal cord repair, limb regeneration, and organ healing, is barely hanging on in its natural habitat. Xochimilco's ancient canal system, which, by the way, if you have a sec and care to, you should look up what it used to look like. It was pretty cool and innovative. But it's been badly damaged by pollution, invasive fish species like tilapia and carp, urban development, and water diversion. So now wild axolotls have nowhere to hide. Their numbers have gone right in the carpet. The creature that refused to grow up is now at serious risk of never growing old in any form. Which, sucks. But people are trying to help. Because wild axolotls are down to only a few hundred individuals, scientists are now trying to reintroduce captive-bred axolotls back into restored and artificial wetland habitats near Xochimilco. And good news, early experiments show these salamanders can survive, forage, and even gain weight in the wild. A hopeful sign for repopulation. How does an animal with mediocre sight, living in the dark, murky water, manage to hunt with any accuracy? That's right, these cute little guys are predators. And they're not just sniffing around and hoping for the best. It's a common misconception that these mighty hunters stalk their prey purely by smell or by spotting movement. They do use those senses, but their real advantage, their secret weapon, is something far stranger and more sophisticated than I would have given them credit for. Axolotls hunt by detecting electricity. Not in a flashy electric eel way. They can't generate electricity, but they hunt by listening for what you might call the spark of life. Every living creature gives off tiny electrical signals. You don't notice it, but axolotls do. All right, nerds, come in closer. Everyone else, take 5. Hidden in their heads are specialized electroreceptors called ampullary organs. They're evolutionarily related to the famous apullae of Lorenzi found in sharks and rays. Just a lot less intimidating. If you look closely at the axolotl's head, you might notice faint lines of tiny pores. Those aren't just skin texture. They're openings to jelly-filled canals. Actual biological jelly. Yum. Those canals funnel electrical information from the surrounding water down to sensory cells buried in the skin. The jelly is highly conductive, which means it transmits electrical signals straight to the nerves, bypassing the resistance of the skin entirely. Think of it like the axolotl has a set of biological headphones tuned to the electrical hum of living things. Wow, if a person had that, you'd think they were super creepy. But anyway, these organs work together in another system called the lateral line, a series of pores running down the sides of the body that detect changes in water pressure. So here's how the teamwork breaks down. The lateral line feels movement, like the ripple of a worm wriggling in the mud. The ampullary organs hear electricity, tiny pulses generated by muscles and nerves. The axolotls are passive listeners. Like I mentioned, they don't generate electricity like electric eels, so they don't send anything out. They just wait. They're tuned in to the background noise of life around them. Specifically, they're listening for 3 things. First are those muscle contractions. Every time a worm wriggles or a fish swims, its muscles fire and create tiny little electrical spike. The second is those groovy nerve impulses. Every thoughtless little neuron fired in a prey animal produces a detectable electrical field. And third, even a completely motionless animal gives itself away. Living tissues are constantly exchanging ions with the surrounding water, especially at the gills or mucous membranes. That chemical exchange creates a weak but steady electrical signal, so even hiding doesn't save you. In the cloudy, silt-filled waters of Lake Xochimilco, where visibility is terrible, this sixth sense lets axolotls hunt what they can't see. And then comes the geometry. Whoa. An axolotl's head is wide, spacing out those sensors. By comparing signal strength on the left side versus the right, it can triangulate the exact location of its prey. It's basically doing underwater electrical trigonometry. Pretty cool. Once the signal peaks, once the electricity is the loudest, the axolotl strikes. It snaps its mouth open, creating a sudden vacuum that sucks in the prey along with water, silt, and whatever else happens to be nearby. The whole thing takes milliseconds. No chase, no real drama, just slurp. Which means the axolotl isn't hunting by sight, it's hunting by listening to life itself and then vacuuming it into its cute widow face. I wonder if them being cute makes the prey feel better about it at all. Like they're about to die, but maybe it's 10% better? Like, well, this is how I go. At least it's adorable. before you even ask, axolotl mating is not what you'd expect. There's no wrestling around or anything, no direct contact in the way most mammals would recognize as doing the thing. Instead, it's more like a slightly boring, synchronized aquatic dance, guided by chemistry and extremely specific positioning. I mean, if you thought the Catholic Church was strict on that, wait to hear about these guys. Think ballroom dancing, but everyone is slippery and naked. Ooh. First, the mood has to be right. They skip the wine, but they do like some dim lighting. In the wild, mating is triggered by the arrival of spring, cooler water, changing light cycles. In captivity, breeders simulate this with slight temperature drop and adjusted lighting. This environmental shift tells the males, it's time to be mysterious and bring my A game. The male begins releasing pheromones into the water, and the courtship starts. The male approaches the female and nudges her hindquarters with his snout, a bit rude and forward if you ask me. He's not aggressive about it, but it's like a polite, "Hey girl, you're looking good. Are those new gills?" If she doesn't swim away, he proceeds to the next move, what scientists describe as tail undulation. It looks kind of like an underwater hula dance. He swims ahead of her and waves the lower half of his tail back and forth, fanning pheromones toward her like he's wafting a candle scent she didn't know she craved. If the female's interested, she'll follow him closely, nose near his tail, as they circle the tank together in what can be described as a slow, determined conga line of two. This can go on for hours. And then, the magic happens. Axolotls don't copulate directly, probably too much FaceTime for them. Instead, the male performs a maneuver that feels both ingenious and deeply unserious. He stops, lowers his body, and deposits a spermatophore. This is like a tiny cone of clear jelly, and it's topped with a little white cap of sperm. Placed carefully on a flat surface like the tank floor or a rock, it's like a weird little poo deposit. Then he swims forward exactly one body length. Because the female is following him so closely, this pulls her forward until her cloaca is positioned perfectly over the spermatophore. She lowers herself, picks up the sperm cap, and internal fertilization occurs. Sexy, I know. No touching or eye contact required, or wanted. Once that's done, the whole situation escalates pretty quickly. Within about 12 to 24 hours after all that romance, the female begins laying eggs. She looks for plants, real or fake, and attaches the eggs individually or in long jelly-like strings. A healthy female can lay anywhere from 100 to 1,000 eggs in one session, but here's an important note. Axolotls have zero parenting instincts. Not a shred. Once the eggs are laid, both parents immediately reclassify them in their heads as food. In captivity, the eggs must be removed right away, or they'll be eaten by the very creatures who work so carefully to make them. Which feels kinda cruel, but is also very on brand for an animal that hunts by listening for electricity and vacuuming other animals into its face. Now let's talk about the thing that makes scientists pace around their offices like conspiracy theorists with corkboards: regeneration. Their diet is mostly fish and worms. Ooh, can I have some? But as babies, they're in competition with one another for food, so they snack on each other. This isn't actually much of a problem for them because they regenerate fairly quickly. When they lose a limb, skin cells divide and cover the wound. Then, progenitor cells, which can develop into various tissues, form a mass at the injury site. Nearby nerves secrete growth-promoting proteins, and over the next few weeks, a new limb emerges. Like I said, these animals rate extremely high in the ranks of the world's most studied animals. When some nosy scientists sequenced their genome and found it to be 10 times longer than a human's. And some saw many repeated sequences, most of which don't code for proteins and have no known function. Expectedly, they found several genes that are key in regeneration, but their success seems to be more about how they regulate these genes of theirs. They don't just regrow limbs, they regrow them perfectly. Bone, muscle, nerves, blood vessels, skin, all in correct order. No scar tissue, no Frankenstein seams. They can regenerate tails, legs, parts of their heart, sections of their spinal cord, and even pieces of their brain. And they do it without rejecting the tissue or losing function. Humans, meanwhile, pull a muscle and spend 6 months complaining about it, and it still might not be perfect after that. Get ready for a huh moment coming. Axolotls don't just regrow parts randomly. Their cells seem to remember where they belong. The regrown limb knows it's a left leg, not a tail. A hand doesn't turn into a foot. There's some biological GPS happening that we don't fully understand yet. And axolotls can regenerate the same limb multiple times. Lose it again? No problem. Regrow it again, like a biological save file. They can even accept transplants from other axolotls like eyes and hearts. I know. You can probably guess. Scientists are studying the genes that control this process in hopes of unlocking regenerative medicine in humans. Spinal cord injuries, amputations, organ repair. The axolotl has been quietly carrying this ability for millennia. So here's the part where scientists stop admiring axolotls from afar and start asking, why can they do this and we can't? When an axolotl loses a limb, it doesn't scar over. It forms a blastema, that strange little mound of cells that forget what they were, rewind and rebuild the limb correctly from scratch. For a long time, researchers assumed the answer must be something exotic, some rare salamander-only cell, some magical genetic switch humans just don't have. But then came an experiment that quietly changed everything. They discovered that if you inject a drug into an axolotl that eliminates macrophages, a type of immune cell we also have, before amputating a limb, the axolotl stops regenerating. No blastema, no regrowth. Instead, the wound heals the way a human wound does. It forms familiar scar tissue. Same animal, same genes, same cells, different immune response. Which tells us something huge. Regeneration doesn't fail because axolotls have special parts we lack. It fails because the immune system sets the tone. In axolotls, macrophages don't just clean up debris. They actively shape the healing environment. They suppress runaway inflammation. They send signals that say, don't rush, don't seal this shut, let's just rebuild. When those macrophages are gone, the body flips into emergency mode. Close it fast, patch it up, keep it moving. Scar tissue isn't regeneration, it's containment. And suddenly, axolotl healing doesn't look like science fiction anymore. It looks like a different decision tree. Same basic tools, different instructions. Which brings us to a curious human footnote. Because there is one small place where humans regenerate, well, kind of. Our fingernails. They grow continuously from a specialized region called the nail matrix, which contains stem cells capable of ongoing growth and repair. Lose part of a fingernail? No problem. It comes back, over and over and over again. And for years, some scientists have wondered if that's a leftover feature, a biological echo from a time when our regenerative abilities were stronger. Not full limb regrowth, not blastemas, but a faint remnant. A place where the body knows how to keep building instead of sealing shut. That doesn't mean humans are secretly salamanders, and it doesn't mean we're about to regrow arms or anything, but it does suggest something important. Regeneration isn't about adding something new to the human body, it's about changing the rules of healing. Axolotls don't heal better because they're tougher. They heal better because their immune system knows when to step back. They allow cells to pause and reorganize. And that's why researchers aren't asking how do we turn humans into axolotls. They're asking how do we prevent scarring? How do we control inflammation instead of letting it take over? How do we give the body time to rebuild instead of forcing it to lock things down? Because the blastema isn't magic, macrophages aren't exotic, and regeneration may not be lost, just suppressed. Which means healing might not be about doing more, it might be about doing less at exactly the right moment. And axolotls don't get cancer very often. Their cells divide like maniacs during regeneration, yet somehow don't spiral into chaos the way human cells do, which implies they have extremely tight cellular regulation that allows healing without mutation. Kind of rude of them to keep this to themselves if you ask me. Scientists think their forever young condition evolved because their stable habitat. For salamanders that develop in waters that dry up, transitioning to a land animal is a smart card to play. But the lakes axolotls evolved in were unchanging year-round and didn't host many aquatic predators, so it was advantageous to just forego the demands of metamorphosis. They didn't completely lose the ability, though. Axolotls can technically undergo metamorphosis if forced. And of course, we've forced this. Scientists can introduce thyroid hormones and trigger transformation into a more typical salamander form. And the result is not great. They lose their gills, their skin changes. They still keep a hint of a smile, but they're less cute. And they become more terrestrial. More importantly, their lifespan often shortens and they lose some of their self-healing ability. It's like forcing someone to become something they weren't meant to be, and their body knows it, which feels metaphorical enough to make a therapist nod solemnly. Axolotls didn't fail to metamorphose, they evolved not to. Neoteny, or their permanent youth, isn't a glitch, it's their successful strategy. Can we park for a moment and just appreciate the axolotl's famous face? If you haven't seen these before, take a second, look up images. They have this adorable little smile, but it's not due to emotion, it's just their anatomy. Their mouths curve upward naturally, so they always look generally pleased, even when missing a limb or being studied. This really matters because humans are very bad at not projecting feelings onto faces. These animals might be deeply distressed or sick, and we're looking at it like, "Aw, he's smiling at me." Stress is often misread as them just being chill. People think they're relaxed, but what might actually be happening is their water is too warm, or ammonia levels are spiking. So the axolotl is stressed but motionless. In reality, lethargy is often a warning sign, not relaxation. By the time the animal shows obvious physical symptoms like a curling tail, fungus, or loss of appetite, the problem has been going on for a while and the body is starting to shut down. Or people think they don't mind being handled, but what might be happening is that their stress hormones spike. Their skin absorbs residues from your grimy little hands, and they might go away from that interaction with damage to their protective slime coating. I mean, how would you like it if someone messed up your slime coating? Axolotls often freeze when handled, no thrashing or escape behavior. Just stillness and that same cute little smile. To humans, that reads as tolerance. To the axolotl, it's a stress response. Repeated handling can lead to illness, infection, or shortened lifespan, all while the animal looks serene and unbothered. And yes, axolotls can regenerate, but the regeneration still requires proper conditions. Poor water quality during regeneration can lead to malformed growth, infection, or death. Humans are face readers. We're wired to trust expressions. With axolotls, we need to be watching their behavior, not faces. We need to measure their environment and respect signals we don't intuitively understand. I saw that sometimes they'll morph in captivity, and that's often linked to stress. Stress doesn't necessarily help axolotls morphose, it usually just hurts them. But in rare cases, chronic severe stress destabilizes the system enough to push them into a change they weren't built to survive. Metamorphosis requires thyroid hormone activation. Stress by itself doesn't reliably flip that switch. But if they're in an environment that's inappropriate enough to interfere with its hormonal balance, morphing can happen, unfortunately. The axolotl didn't conquer land. They stayed weird, watery, and exactly itself. And in doing so, it may help us to learn how to heal, which is pretty dang cool. Alright, let me put my responsible adult hat on for a sec, because at this point in the episode, I'm sure some of you are thinking, I want one. And others might be thinking, my kid would love this. And I'm thinking, this is the kind of animal that people bring home as a pet, whose life story ends in being a very stressed salamander, leaving behind a very sorry adult dripping with guilt. So let's talk about it. Is it okay for children to have axolotls as pets? My answer would be yes, with an asterisk so large it deserves its own tank. Axolotls are not cuddly pets. They're not bring it to show and tell pets. They're not, can I hold him for just a sec pets? They're more like look but don't touch the water cryptides who prefer to be admired the way one admires a lava lamp or a really personable houseplant. Their skin is so delicate, like absurdly delicate. It absorbs whatever gross things you've touched last. Even if you're trying to be good, lotion, soap residue, it's just a bad jam for them. So handling them doesn't just stress them out, it can actually hurt them. So if a kid wants a pet they can snuggle, this one's a hard no. But if you've got a delightfully nerdy kid who's science curious, axolotls can be incredible. They're quiet, they don't bark, they don't shed, they don't escape and reappear 6 months later inside a couch. After I just said that, I really hope not. They just float there, being weird, regrowing organs, and silently flexing on medical science. Here's the catch though, and it's a big one. Axolotls are not beginner pets. They need cool water, not room temperature-ish, cool. If their water gets too warm, they get stressed. Stressed axolotls get sick, and sick axolotls break hearts.
Aww.
In many homes, this means a tank chiller, which is expensive and deeply unfun to explain after the fact. Their tanks must be cycled properly and their water chemistry needs monitoring. Ammonia, nitrates, the whole alphabet soup. So this is not something a child manages solo. If anything, this is an adult hobby that a child can participate in. If an axolotl is in a household with kids, the adult is the real owner, and the child is the enthusiastic assistant. And that's not a bad thing at all. Axolotls are critically endangered in the wild. The ones kept as pets are captive bred. And caring for one responsibly can actually teach kids something rare. That fascination comes with responsibility. That wonder doesn't excuse neglect. And some of the coolest beings on Earth survive only if us humans get our act together. So are axolotls good pets for children? I'd say they're good pets around children, as long as there's boundaries, supervision, and a shared sense of stewardship. And actually understanding stewardship is an awesome concept to give to a kid. These animals are living proof that not everything magical is meant to be touched and handled. Some things are meant to be protected, observed, and respected. All right, taking my adult hat off and throwing it off a cliff. Thank you so much for listening to this little messy morsel. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed all our episodes from 2025. In fact, I've used this episode as an avenue to give a small gift to our guests from last year. They're all going to be getting the first Messy Minded t-shirt. It'll be a black shirt featuring an image of an axolotl with the word questions under it. And for you nerds that have been listening to me for a while, you know I love puns, and hopefully have put it together for my earlier joke, axolotl questions, which seems like a great theme for this Messy Minded podcast, given that the whole point is that I'm sitting with a question I have for a while and then presenting it to you fine folks. Since I started in June last year, I'm only about halfway through my year of podcasting, but looking back at 2025, unbelievably, this podcast has been listened to in 26 countries. I have a handful of listeners in France, but there's one that started listening pretty early on. And because I noticed that last summer, this is a little embarrassing to admit, but I always check to see if they've listened. So if you think you might be that person, do get a hold of me. Send me an email at messymindedpod@gmail.com and tell me your town. If you're the original listener, I'll write you back asking for your shirt size, and I will happily mail you a free shirt. For the rest of you, if you have ideas for future episodes or just want to say hello, I love that stuff. You can comment on this episode or reach me in the socials at messymindedpod or email messymindedpod@gmail.com.